I honestly don't know what hurt more, the tight dress digging into my ribs, or the sight of my husband with another woman in the middle of the party I had organized. Yes, for him, the man who once promised to love me for the rest of his life, the same man who, right in that moment, laughed in the middle of the room with a champagne flute in one hand and the other on someone else's waist. He knew I was watching, and he didn't care. It was Rodrigo's 50th birthday, half a life. I'd spent the last 23 years by his side. I planned every detail of that night like a fool. The catering, live band, decorations with photos from his childhood, tributes from friends, all to remind him of who he was, or better yet, who we were. But at that party, in front of everyone, he chose to reveal his new version of himself, with her, the kind of woman who looks like she walked out of a magazine, but has nothing behind the eyes except a fake smile, the kind who laughs too loud just to be noticed, the kind who touches too much under the excuse of being friendly. That's how she walked in, clinging to his arm like she was the wife, like I was the stranger. And in that moment, truth be told, I did feel like an intruder in my own life. I scanned the room, looking for one face, one person who might silently say, "This isn't right." But all I saw were stares filled with pity, and that hurts more than betrayal. While they laughed at something I couldn't hear, my heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. A part of me wanted to scream. The other part just wanted to disappear. But then I saw my daughter, Isabella, standing near the staircase. She had seen it too. She was hurt too. And it was for her that I kept it together. It was for her that I took a breath and stayed upright. That night, something inside me died. But something else was born. The absolute certainty that I would never let myself be humiliated like that again. Rodrigo might have thought he had won, that he had all the power. But what he didn't know is that I had been getting ready. I just needed that one final drop to overflow, and now it had. The silence in the car was suffocating. Isabella sat beside me in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, jaw tight, fists clenched on her lap. I didn't cry. Not yet. I wasn't ready to break down. Not while she was watching. She needed strength tonight, and I needed to be that strength, even if I was crumbling inside. Back home, the house that had once been our safe haven now felt like a museum of lies. Every corner, every frame, every little object that once meant something felt fake now. I walked through the hallway like a ghost, trying to remember what it felt like to be truly seen, truly loved. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed where I had once dreamed of growing old next to Rodrigo. Now, all I could see was betrayal. I reached for the drawer, pulling out the small notebook I had been secretly writing in for months. Not poetry, not confessions, evidence, receipts, dates, strange bank transfers, hotel bookings under fake names, copies of text messages I had found weeks ago when my gut told me something wasn't right, and my heart tried to pretend it was just stress. I wanted to believe he was still the man I had fallen in love with, but he wasn't. He had become a stranger I lived with, and I had been preparing for this day long before he thought I knew anything. "You're not going to let him win like this, are you?" Isabella asked from the doorway. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was calm, cold, like mine. "No," I said. "Not a chance." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a child anymore. She had seen too much, felt too much. She deserved better, and so did I. I walked to my closet, opened the hidden box behind the winter coats, and pulled out a folder with my name printed on it in bold letters, divorce papers, already drafted. All they needed was my signature and the right timing. Now was the right time. And this is the moment I want you to remember something. If you've ever been betrayed, humiliated, or made to feel like your voice didn't matter, I want to hear your story. Drop your best email in the comments if you've lived through something powerful and want me to transform it into a video. I read every submission personally, and I will reach out. You're not alone, and your story deserves to be told. That night, after Isabella went to bed, I didn't sleep. I stayed up planning, calculating, not revenge, justice, quiet, dignified, devastating justice, the kind he'd never see coming, the kind he'd remember for the rest of his life. I started making the calls, first to my lawyer, then to the private investigator, then to the accountant who had helped me set up a personal emergency fund a year ago, just in case, because a woman who's been lied to for years doesn't wait for the storm to come. She builds the ark in silence. By morning, I had the plan, a way out, a way forward, and I would take it, with my head held high. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I had ignored the signs, the late nights, the sudden business trips, the emotional distance masked by superficial affection. Rodrigo didn't just cheat on me at his party. He had been cheating for months, maybe years, and I had let myself believe that silence was strength, that patience would be rewarded, that love, or what was left of it, was still enough. It wasn't. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, brushing my hair with robotic movements. My reflection didn't flinch. I looked tired, older than yesterday. But there was something new behind my eyes. Focus. Resolve. Isabella was at the kitchen table eating cereal in silence. Her phone was on the table, buzzing with group messages. I didn't ask what they were saying. I didn't have to. The video of the party had already gone viral. Someone had caught the moment Rodrigo kissed that woman on the cheek. Just a little too long. Just a little too obvious, while I stood 5 feet away pretending I didn't see. But everyone saw. The internet saw. My family saw. My daughter saw. He had embarrassed me publicly. Now I would respond. Not with screaming or chaos, but with clarity. I spent the day making moves. First, I scheduled an emergency appointment with my lawyer. I told him everything. The affair, the humiliation, the financial concerns. He listened carefully, then nodded. "You're ahead of the game," he said. "Most women come in here unsure, but you already know what you want." "I do," I said. "I want out, and I want to take back what's mine." He smiled. "Then we'll move fast." Next, I called the private investigator I had hired quietly a few months ago. At the time, I felt ridiculous doing it, like some paranoid character in a soap opera. But now, I was grateful I had followed my instincts. "Camilla," I said when she answered, "how solid is the evidence?" "Bulletproof," she replied. "Photos, hotel records, messages. He's been sloppy." "Good," I said. "It's time." Back home, I began the second purge. I didn't cry this time. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was preparing. I packed boxes, but not with sadness, with precision. Jewelry from my grandmother, financial documents, family photos, but only the ones with me and Isabella. Rodrigo's things stayed untouched. I didn't care what happened to them. I opened the closet and saw my wedding dress. It had been preserved in a box, sealed like some sacred memory. I opened it. White silk, delicate lace, a symbol of something that no longer existed. Without hesitation, I stuffed it into a trash bag and carried it to the curb. No more symbols. No more illusions. The third call I made was to the bank. I transferred everything I legally could into a protected account under my name. Rodrigo had always treated our finances like his personal kingdom. He managed it all. Investments, payments, decisions. While I took care of the home, the child, the real labor that no one claps for. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not the quiet one. Not the obedient one, not the one who begged to be chosen. I was done waiting. That night, Isabella knocked gently on my bedroom door. She stepped inside and sat beside me. "Are we leaving?" she asked. I nodded. "We are." She didn't cry. She didn't resist. She just leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Good." I smiled through the lump in my throat. "You okay?" "Better than okay. I'm proud of you, Mom." It was strange. I had feared this moment for years, thought it would destroy her, but she wasn't breaking. She was rising, just like me. We left before dawn. There was no dramatic farewell, no shouting, no slammed doors, just silence and headlights cutting through the early morning fog. Isabella was half asleep in the passenger seat, her backpack resting on her lap, headphones in her ears. I drove with both hands on the wheel, steady, calm, clear. The sun hadn't even broken the sky yet, but I could already feel it rising inside me. By the time Rodrigo woke up, the house would be half empty, and his wife and daughter would be long gone. We checked into a small hotel downtown. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. A temporary space where we could breathe. I didn't want to stay with relatives or friends. I didn't want pity. I didn't want whispered questions or forced comfort. I just needed space to think. Isabella collapsed onto one of the twin beds and immediately fell asleep. She hadn't said much during the drive. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. It wasn't fear. It was release. While she slept, I opened my laptop and checked the news. The video of the party was everywhere now. Pages and pages of comments, clips edited with dramatic music, hashtags trending with names like "Unwife Wins," "Karma at the Party," and "Know Your Worth." People I didn't even know were calling me brave. Others were debating whether I had overreacted. One post read, "She stayed silent through the betrayal, but her silence was the storm." That one made me pause. Because they were right. Rodrigo had underestimated the woman he thought he owned. And now, the internet was watching his downfall unfold in real time. He tried to call, of course, dozens of times. Texts, emails, voicemails saying things like, "Let's talk," and "You're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally free of needing anything from him. At noon, my lawyer called. "We served him this morning," he said. "At his office. In front of everyone." I closed my eyes. "And?" He looked like someone punched him in the chest, said he didn't see it coming. I laughed. A bitter, breathy laugh. Of course he didn't. "He has no idea what's in the paperwork, by the way. You've got the house, full custody, and we're going after joint assets. With the evidence you've got, this case is airtight." "Good," I said. "He deserves every piece of it." That afternoon, Isabella and I walked through a new apartment I had arranged to visit. It wasn't big, but it had everything we needed. Safety, privacy, And light, so much light. The sun poured through the windows like a blessing. I like it, she said simply, staring out at the small balcony. It feels honest. Honest? I asked. She turned to me. Yeah, no pretending here. No fake smiles. Just peace. We signed the lease that evening. When we got back to the hotel, the front desk handed me a message. A reporter from a local network wanted to talk. We're covering the story of the woman who walked away. And won, the note said. I tossed it in the trash. This wasn't a victory parade. It was a resurrection. That night, Rodrigo finally showed up at the hotel. I saw him through the security camera on my phone. He was in the lobby, pacing, looking lost. The same man who once walked into rooms with all the confidence in the world now looked like a man who had lost his map, and maybe his soul with it. The front desk didn't let him up. I had made that clear. No visitors without permission, no exceptions. He stood there for 10 minutes, trying to negotiate, then finally left. I didn't even flinch. He was learning, finally, what it felt like to be on the outside of a door he couldn't open. Rodrigo never stopped trying to fix what he had broken. But the thing is, you can't fix what you shattered with intention. You can't uncrack glass with apologies, or stitch back dignity once it's been torn in front of 100 people. His messages became more frequent, less arrogant, more desperate. But I had already passed the point of hoping for change. Hope had kept me stuck for too long. At the new apartment, life slowly began to feel normal again, or at least a new version of normal. Isabella unpacked her things like she had done it a dozen times. She hung her favorite posters, set up her desk, and organized her closet. I watched her from the doorway and realized she wasn't just adapting, she was healing. I was too. Each day I let go of something old, a photo frame, a voicemail I hadn't listened to, a habit of checking the clock to see if Rodrigo would be late again. I deleted his contact, not out of anger, but because there was nothing more to say. 3 days after the move, I had coffee with my lawyer at a quiet cafe. He showed me the updated financial reports, the latest from the private investigator, and the paperwork we'd submit for court. He's hiding money, he said, but we've already traced 2 of the accounts. Offshore, unreported, and open just before he met her. Of course, Rodrigo didn't fall into temptation. He engineered it, planned it, funded it. I want everything on the table, I told him. Not just for me, for Isabella. You'll get it, he promised. And more. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Isabella's school. Her guidance counselor wanted to speak with me. She's doing well, the woman said. She's focused, engaged, showing leadership. I'm glad, I said. But she wrote something in her essay that made me pause. She said, sometimes you don't know how strong your mother is until you watch her walk away from everything that was supposed to be hers, with nothing but her name. The words hit me in the chest, hard. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of someone who wouldn't understand. But when I got home, I sat on the floor of our quiet apartment and let the weight of that sentence settle inside me. She saw me, not the weak, tired woman who begged for crumbs of affection, but the woman who stood up, who walked out, who refused to let betrayal be her legacy. The next morning, the media reached out again, more persistent this time. One of the biggest national networks wanted to feature my story in a segment about women reclaiming their voice after public betrayal. They were calling me a symbol. I didn't care about being a symbol. I cared about truth. Still, something about the offer made me pause. Maybe if I spoke, other women like me, would see that it's possible. That silence isn't the same as peace. That endurance isn't the same as love. That day, I told my story on camera, but I didn't name names. I didn't slander or shame. I just spoke the truth. I talked about what it feels like to smile through suspicion, to host dinner parties while your heart is breaking, to give and give and give, and still not be enough for someone who never intended to see you. And I spoke about the moment I decided to leave, the exact second I stopped begging to be chosen and chose myself instead. The interview aired 3 days later, and everything changed. The video exploded, thousands of comments, messages, emails from women and men who had lived the same story in different cities with different faces, people who had felt invisible, disrespected, betrayed. They weren't looking for advice. They were looking for permission. Permission to stop enduring. Permission to walk away. One comment stood out. I thought I was the only one. I'm watching this from Mexico City, crying in my kitchen. Thank you. Another. I'm from Johannesburg. My husband did the same. I'm leaving tomorrow. And another, watching from Toronto. You just gave me the courage to start over at 52. That night, as I read each message, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Connection. Not pity. Not sympathy, but powerful, shared understanding. And if you're here right now watching this story, I want to know where you're from. Tell me in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching this from? I want to know how far this story is traveling, because it's no longer just mine. It's ours now. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Each morning felt a little less heavy. I woke up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something about watching the sun rise through new windows, in a place untouched by betrayal, that made it feel like time was finally mine again. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning. Rodrigo's messages had slowed by now. The desperation had given way to silence, the kind that comes when someone realizes the door is truly closed. My lawyer continued working with precision. Every new discovery added another brick to the wall I was building between me and the life I had left behind. Bank records, travel logs, a second phone line, private accounts in his cousin's name. Rodrigo hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had betrayed me financially, systematically, deliberately. But I had receipts and power, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to use either. I focused on rebuilding, not with dramatic gestures, but through quiet, consistent choices. I reorganized my resume. I applied to a few consulting jobs I never thought I'd be confident enough to pursue. I took meetings. I said what I thought without shrinking. The world didn't fall apart when I took up space. In fact, it started to open up. Isabella thrived too. Her grades went up. Her shoulders relaxed. She started smiling without forcing it. Sometimes we would sit on the balcony and talk for hours, not about Rodrigo, not about pain, but about the future, her plans, my ideas, our life. And it felt like we were discovering each other all over again, without the noise of lies humming in the background. The media attention faded eventually, as it always does, but the impact didn't. I kept receiving emails from women who saw in my story a mirror, women from all ages, all backgrounds. Some still living in silence, others on the verge of walking away. They didn't want pity, they wanted proof. Proof that surviving wasn't the end. That beyond survival, there could be peace, joy, dignity. I began writing. Not a book, not yet, but pieces, short reflections, stories, essays. At first, I shared them anonymously online. The response was overwhelming. They weren't perfectly written. They didn't follow rules, but they were real. And real, I learned, is what people crave when everything around them feels fake. Then came the news I hadn't expected. Rodrigo lost his job. The board had seen the videos. The clients had asked questions. The whispers in the hallways turned to pressure, and pressure turned to dismissal. They couldn't afford the PR nightmare, not with him front and center. And so, the man who once walked with arrogance through every boardroom was now unemployed, bitter, and exposed. Word spread quickly. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't celebrate. But I did feel something settle inside me, like a debt had been repaid, even if just a small one. Life had a way of balancing itself, and sometimes it did so without needing any help from me. Rodrigo tried reaching out again after that. The tone was different now, less desperate, more manipulative. He started framing himself as a victim, blaming me for his downfall, saying I had turned our daughter against him, that I had destroyed our family over one mistake. But by then, the words didn't land. They didn't hurt, because they didn't matter. I had learned something powerful. When someone spends years quietly eroding your self-worth, the most violent thing you can do in return is simply move on. One evening, I came home to find Isabella cooking pasta in our small kitchen. Music played from her phone. She looked up and smiled, effortlessly. That smile used to be rare. Now, it lived here. I opened a bottle of wine, nothing fancy, just a small indulgence, and we ate together at the kitchen counter, laughing about something she read online. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, just peace. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, looking out at the city lights. I thought about everything that had happened, about the woman I used to be, quiet, composed, constantly trying to hold everything together. I thought about how hard I had worked to convince myself that love meant sacrifice, that silence was a form of strength, that staying was noble. It wasn't. It was fear. And now, I was free of it. Rodrigo had always been the kind of man who needed an audience. He fed on admiration, on being the center of every room, every decision, every story. So when the silence began, when no one returned his calls, when invitations stopped coming, when his name brought awkward glances instead of respect, it wasn't just uncomfortable for him, it was unbearable. He tried to re-enter the narrative in subtle ways. Emails masked as concern, long voice notes pretending to be reflections, social media posts filled with quotes about redemption, forgiveness, starting over. None of it worked. The world had moved on. I had moved on. And perhaps that's what truly broke him. Not the loss of money or status, but the realization that the woman he thought would always be there simply wasn't anymore. By now, the legal process was well underway. My lawyer kept me informed but shielded me from the noise. The financial forensics revealed layers I hadn't anticipated. Hidden debts, misused joint funds, investments in ventures that had failed silently, while he pretended everything was fine. The image of the powerful provider had been just that, an image. Beneath it, the empire was already crumbling. I wasn't angry. I was just done. That clarity became a force in every area of my life. I started taking better care of myself, not out of vanity, but out of respect. I joined a local gym, not to sculpt my body, but to reconnect with it. I took long walks without checking my phone. I sat in cafes alone, sipping coffee slowly, letting the stillness become a habit. And for the first time in years, I started sleeping through the night. No anxiety pulling me awake at 3 a.m. No wondering if he was where he said he'd be. Isabella, too, seemed lighter. She started talking more about college, about leaving the city, about doing something bold. I encouraged her. I didn't want her to learn the same lessons I did through pain. I wanted her to know she could choose herself, without shame, without fear. One afternoon, she left a note on my desk, just a short one, handwritten on a torn page from her notebook. It said, "I'm proud of the woman you became. Thank you for not breaking." I kept that note in my wallet, still do. Rodrigo's life continued unraveling. The job leads dried up. The connections he once relied on disappeared. A man who had always defined himself by what he had suddenly had to face who he was without it. And who he wasn't enough. He tried to win people back, told different versions of the story to different people. In some, I was cold. In others, I was irrational. But none of them stuck, because the truth was too loud, too public, too obvious. And eventually, even his family stopped defending him. I heard from his brother once, Zachary. We had never been close, but there had always been mutual respect. He called late one evening and spoke in a voice that sounded tired, not just physically, but soul deep. "He's not doing well," Zachary said. I think he thought he could fix this with charm. "He can't," I answered simply. "I know. I just wanted you to hear it from someone neutral. You're not the villain here, no matter what he tells himself." I thanked him and we hung up. I didn't ask for updates again. That weekend, I attended a small gathering at a women's community group I'd been volunteering with. We shared stories, some quiet, some devastating, all powerful, and for the first time, I told mine out loud. No cameras, no audience, just women, listening. And when I finished, there were no claps, no praise, just a silence so heavy and real, it felt like healing. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was older. Her eyes held years of sadness and a flicker of hope. "Do you think," she asked softly, "do you think it's too late to start over?" I looked at her, really looked, and then I answered with the only truth I knew. It's only too late if you believe you're not worth it. Peace doesn't arrive like a celebration. It arrives quietly, without fanfare. It moves in like a guest you forgot you invited. Slow, polite, firm, and when it settles, you begin to notice how loud your life used to be, how much noise you called normal, how much pain you learned to accommodate. That's what life became for me. Quiet, steady peace. The legal battle ended faster than we expected. Rodrigo had no fight left in him. The moment he realized the evidence couldn't be undone, not the bank records, not the affair, not the abandonment, he folded. The court ruled in my favor across the board. Full custody, majority of the joint assets, alimony, control over the house, which I no longer wanted. I sold it within a week. Letting go of it felt symbolic. It was never the house I missed. It was the life I thought I had inside it. With the settlement, I made choices. Not flashy ones, not new cars or designer bags, but choices that built stability. I paid off debts, secured Isabella's future, and started something of my own. A consulting agency for women transitioning after divorce, career gaps, or emotional upheaval. I didn't plan it. It grew out of the messages I kept receiving, the questions, the stories. I saw a need. I stepped into it. Work gave me purpose, but it wasn't about success. It was about identity. I no longer introduced myself as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's shadow. I was a woman who survived, then healed, then led. Isabella thrived too. She was accepted into a competitive pre-college program in another state. We cried when she got the letter, not out of sadness, but pride. She had carried the weight of this family on her small shoulders for too long. Now, she'd get to grow in a space that was entirely hers. We planned her move together, and for once, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt promising. Rodrigo didn't attend the custody hearing. His lawyer stood in for him. Word was, he had moved into a small apartment in another part of town, surviving on short-term gigs and occasional handouts from people who hadn't seen the video, or pretended they hadn't. His life had shrunk, not because I took it from him, but because he had built it on lies. And lies, eventually, collapse. I saw him once, by accident, at a grocery store. He was thinner, paler, hair unkempt. Our eyes met for half a second, and in that moment, I saw everything he wanted to say. Regret, shame, longing, but he said nothing, and neither did I. He looked away first. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply made tea, opened a new journal, and began writing the first chapter of something I had been putting off for months, my book. It wasn't about him. Not really. It was about me. About what happens after the fall. About the slow, painful, dignified process of standing back up. I called it what remains when the fire's gone, because that's what healing feels like walking through ashes and realizing you're still here. The writing became part of my routine, not as a goal, but as a release. I wrote about guilt, about rage, about pretending, about rediscovering pleasure, in solitude, in silence, in waking up without fear. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't seek validation. I just wrote. Months passed. The air grew colder. Life settled into its new rhythm. Some days were still hard. Some nights still brought back old memories, but they no longer controlled me. They no longer shaped the woman I saw in the mirror. One evening, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a worn notebook filled with Rodrigo's handwriting, pages and pages of thoughts, reflections, apologies, not sent to win me back, just written, perhaps, as a form of atonement. I didn't read most of it. I didn't need to, but one page caught my eye. It read, "She wasn't perfect, but she was loyal," and I spent years convincing myself that loyalty was ordinary, that love without chaos was boring. I didn't realize how rare peace is until I lost it, until I lost her. I closed the book and put it away. I didn't hate him. I didn't want revenge anymore. I simply wanted my life, and I had it. There's a moment, sometime after survival, when you realize you're no longer rebuilding. You're simply living again, not in resistance, not in reaction. Just living. That's where I found myself. I had stopped counting the days since the party, the one where my life cracked wide open. It no longer mattered how many nights had passed. What mattered was how full each new one felt. The quiet no longer haunted me. It comforted. Mornings were slow, intentional. I made breakfast without rushing, took long showers, lit candles for no reason. I had stopped measuring time by his presence. I had stopped looking for ghosts. The book was finished. It took months of writing, deleting, rewriting, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it in a way that mattered, not just to me, to others. The women who still thought being quiet was strength, who still believed that sacrifice meant love, who still whispered their pain into pillows at night. I wanted to give them something I never had, proof that peace was possible. When the publisher said yes, I cried, not out of ambition, but out of release. It was never about becoming an author. It was about telling the truth, out loud, fully, without shame. Isabella helped me design the cover. She said it should feel like a door opening, not closing. She was right. It always amazed me how much she understood without needing to say much. She had grown so much in such little time. Taller, wiser, softer in the right ways and sharper in others. She smiled more now, laughed from her stomach instead of her throat. She still carried traces of the storm, but she no longer lived in it. She left for college in August. I thought I'd fall apart. I didn't. I cried. Of course. I stood in the airport longer than I should have, watched the plane disappear behind the clouds, but I didn't feel abandoned. I felt proud. I had done my part. I had given her the tools, and she had chosen to use them. That was everything. The apartment felt bigger without her, quieter, but it didn't feel empty. I filled the time with small rituals, mornings at the cafe downstairs, weekend trips to the farmer's market, volunteer shifts, writing group meetings. Life took shape again, not out of necessity, but desire. I wanted to be part of the world again. Rodrigo still tried to reach out occasionally, a forwarded email, a saw this and thought of you text. Once, a message through his brother. Zachary said Rodrigo was spiraling again, out of money, out of options, out of excuses. He asked if I'd be willing to talk to him, not to reconcile, just to listen. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said no, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I didn't hate Rodrigo. I had simply released him from my life. I had nothing left to say, and nothing left to hear. His closure wasn't my responsibility. I had already buried my version of that relationship. He'd have to bury his, on his own. The media came back when the book launched. More interviews, more headlines. The woman who walked away, and won. I hated the phrasing. I didn't win. There was no competition. I just chose something better. I chose myself, and that should never have to feel radical. Still, I did the interviews, sat under bright lights, answered questions, told the story again and again, not because I loved the attention, but because every time I did, another woman found her voice. At a signing event, a woman in her 60s approached me. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't speak at first, just held the book to her chest like it was something sacred. Then she said, "I thought it was too late for me, but then I read your story." I didn't say anything. I just held her hand. That night, I realized something important. Sometimes your healing becomes someone else's permission. And that, more than any court win or financial settlement, was the real victory. There's a myth that healing ends with a dramatic moment, like a final scene where the curtains close and everyone claps. But real healing is quieter. It arrives when you stop checking the door, when you no longer wait for an apology that won't come, when your silence is no longer filled with what-ifs, but with peace. That's how I knew I was truly free. It wasn't a particular morning or a sentence I wrote. It was something simpler. I had finished grocery shopping and realized as I placed bags in the trunk, that I hadn't thought of Rodrigo all day. Not once. Not when I passed his favorite brand of wine. Not when I heard our old song playing over the speakers. Not even when I saw a man with his same posture at the bakery. He was no longer the shadow behind every movement. Later that week, I received a letter, handwritten. The envelope had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I debated opening it. My first instinct was to toss it away, but something told me I didn't need to be afraid anymore. Not of his words, not of his sadness, not of the part of me that used to crave every crumb of his attention. I opened it. It wasn't long, just a page. No begging, no blame, just an acknowledgement. He wrote about silence, about shame, about the difference between regret and remorse. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said he didn't deserve it. That was the only part I agreed with. I didn't write back. Instead, I burned the letter, not out of hatred, but as a ritual, a final release. I watched the edges curl and turn to ash, and I felt no bitterness, only clarity. The past wasn't something I wanted to carry anymore. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. Life kept moving. The book had opened new doors, but I didn't rush through them. I was cautious with invitations, protective of my time. I didn't want to be consumed by purpose the way I had once been consumed by love. I wanted balance. I wanted stillness. I wanted moments that didn't need to be shared or praised, just lived. And then, something unexpected happened. I met someone. It wasn't a movie moment. No spark flying across a crowded room. It was simple. He sat next to me at a charity event. We both reached for the same pen to sign in. He made a quiet joke. I laughed. Not because I was trying to impress him, but because it was genuinely funny. His name was Thomas. He didn't ask about my past on the first day, or the second. He didn't probe or perform. He just listened when I spoke, and respected my silences. He didn't fill space with promises. He filled it with presence. It felt strange at first, being seen without having to perform strength or carry wounds. I wasn't looking for love. I was just learning how to exist again. And that, I realized, was the healthiest way to begin anything. We moved slowly. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into long dinners. But there were no labels. No pressure. I told him my story when I was ready. He didn't flinch. Didn't react with pity or shock. He simply said, "You've done a lot of hard things. You must be tired." I was, but I was also alive, and that mattered more. I didn't need him to fix me. I didn't want him to save me. I just wanted to share time with someone who didn't take more than he gave, and he didn't. He met me where I was, without demanding I be someone else. Isabella met him during a holiday break. They talked easily. She was protective, but kind. When we were alone later that night, she said, "He's calm. I like that." I smiled. Me too. Rodrigo never came up again. Not between us. Not in passing. He had become part of a different lifetime. A closed chapter. Not because I buried it, but because I had truly, fully moved on. The beauty of peace is that it doesn't beg to be noticed. It slips into your life like warm sunlight through a window you forgot you left open. And before you know it, it's part of everything. Your mornings, your thoughts, your breath. Years had passed since the night my life broke in front of everyone. Since the humiliation, the silence, the turning point. But now, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. A version of me that no longer existed. A woman I was grateful for, even if I had outgrown her. I had learned to forgive her, not for staying too long, but for believing that staying was her only option. The world no longer asked me about Rodrigo. People had moved on, as they always do. But I hadn't just moved on. I had transformed. The pain didn't define me anymore. What defined me now were the things I chose daily. Honesty, joy, quiet, purpose. I no longer needed to perform resilience. I simply lived it. Isabella thrived. She had built a life of her own, bold, independent, full of motion. Sometimes we'd go weeks without speaking, both busy, both growing. But every time we reconnected, it was with the same depth, the same bond. We had survived together, and now we were free to become ourselves separately. The consulting agency grew slowly, then steadily. It was never about profit. It was about legacy. I mentored women in silence, helped them write resumes, guided them through court, sat beside them when they signed leases for their first homes alone. Some cried, some laughed. All of them, in one way or another, found pieces of themselves they thought they'd lost forever. That was the power of survival, not just to live, but to witness others rise. Thomas remained in my life, gently, without pressure. We never defined what we were. We didn't need to. We simply chose each other, again and again, without obligation. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, safe, grounded, the kind of love that doesn't need noise to be felt. One evening, while we were sitting at the edge of the pier watching the water, he asked me, "Do you ever think about the past?" I didn't hesitate. "No," I said. "I remember it, but I don't visit it." He nodded, and we fell into silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. That's when I knew I had arrived, not at a finish line, not at some imagined point of closure, but at myself, my truest self, the one that was buried for years beneath fear, duty, expectation, the self that had learned to speak, to walk away, to begin again. That was the real story. Not the betrayal, not the scandal, not the headlines. The story was me. The woman who stayed quiet, then screamed, then healed. All without applause. All without needing anyone to save her. And now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see what I lost. I see what I kept, what I earned, what I rebuilt, and most of all, I see someone I never want to abandon again. If you're still here, listening, breathing with me through these final words, I want to tell you something. Not as someone who survived, but as someone who lived through it with her eyes wide open. There's a kind of silence that comes after the chaos, not the silence of fear or denial or loneliness. A different silence, one that doesn't scream or ache, one that holds you, finally, like a steady hand on your back. That silence is peace, and it doesn't come the way we imagine. It doesn't come after a courtroom win. It doesn't come when someone says, "I'm sorry." It doesn't even come when we meet someone new who treats us better. It comes quietly, when we finally stop looking outward for answers and start coming home to ourselves. That's what this journey became for me. Not revenge, not reinvention, not even healing. It became a return to the version of me that existed long before someone else's shadow covered everything, before I started asking for permission to feel, before I made myself small so someone else could feel big. When you're in it, in the betrayal, in the confusion, in the shame, it feels endless, like your identity will be tied to that pain forever. But I promise you, there's something after it. And it's not just survival. It's not just getting over it. It's becoming someone new, while honoring the woman who got you here. I spent years believing that love was supposed to be hard, that if I just held on tighter, if I just forgave more, if I just stopped complaining, things would go back to the way they were. But the truth is, sometimes the person you're fighting to save doesn't want to be saved. And sometimes, this is the hardest part, they were never really yours to begin with, only the version you built in your head. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. It did. It tore through me. But what came after the breaking was something no one could have predicted. Strength. A quiet, unshakable strength that wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't post selfies or scream into the void. It just stood up every single day and said, "I'm still here, and I won't go back." If my story reminded you of yours, if at any moment you felt your chest tighten because a piece of this mirrored something you've lived, I want to say this, with every fiber of truth in me. You are not alone. You are not broken. And most importantly, you are not to blame. Sometimes love ends. Sometimes people choose to betray. Sometimes the person we trusted most becomes the one who hurts us the deepest. That is not your fault. That is not your failure. That is their decision. And you get to decide what happens next. When I finally walked away, people said I was brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. Exhausted, empty. What they called courage was, for me, just survival, a desperate attempt to protect whatever small part of me was still whole. I didn't leave because I had it all figured out. I left because I knew that staying was costing me more than leaving ever could. And that moment was when everything began to shift. I don't care what your past looks like. I don't care how long you stayed, or how many red flags you ignored, or how many times you forgave what should have been unforgivable. You don't need to punish yourself for loving someone who couldn't love you back in the way you deserved. You were never wrong for wanting to be chosen. You were only wrong in believing that someone else's love was the proof of your worth. Let me be clear. You are worthy right now, not when you're healed, not when you're stronger, not when you've got it all together. Now, in this moment, with the tears you might still carry, with the confusion, with the bruises that are fading but not yet gone. You don't need a new relationship to feel whole. You don't need a revenge story to feel strong. You don't need applause to feel valid. What you need, what saved me, was learning to sit with myself, to look in the mirror and not see a victim or a failure, but a woman who survived. A woman who chose herself, even when the world told her to stay quiet, to forgive, to fix what she didn't break. If you're still in the middle of it, if you haven't walked away yet, or if you did but still feel stuck, take this as proof that the other side exists. And not just any side, a better one, a freer one where you get to breathe without shrinking, where you wake up without fear, where your name feels like yours again. I'll say this, one last time, as gently and honestly as I can. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be tired enough of living in a version of yourself that was never true. And when that moment comes, when you decide to choose peace over performance, everything will change, not overnight, but gradually, quietly, in the way all real things do. You'll laugh again, you'll sleep again, you'll feel sunlight on your skin, and not think of what you lost, but of what you found, yourself. So this story isn't mine anymore. It's yours too. It belongs to every woman who thought she was alone, every woman who stayed longer than she should have, every woman who finally said, enough. I don't need to know your name to believe in your strength. I've seen it already. In the mirror, in the pages of this story, and maybe now, in you.